it's a big investment, but this is somebody's livelihood. This is people have worked their entire lives for this, particular moment, right? They can drive off into the sunset and feel comfortable, right? With the nest egg they have in place.
Yep.
So the anxiety that people have around this decision is real, and how we kind of navigate that. And we're going to do that through tactics and strategies like upfront contracts and, questioning strategies like reversing, right? And pendulum theory.
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners.
In business, I say if you are able to bring in new clients, you're going to be pretty successful. There's a lot of other things that go into running a successful business, but that is foundational to it. And today we're going to focus on one of the most important aspects of that, which we believe is sales, the ability to convert a prospective client into a client for your organization. I am joined by Rob Yoho, who is the principal of MP Solutions, where he has spent the past 25 years helping people grow their organizations, really through the idea of mastering sales and sales management. Rob has been with Sandler Training for 18 years and has worked with hundreds of companies, including a lot of our advisors here at Advisors Excel around sales, sales management, strategy, and goal setting. So, Rob, excited to finally have you on. Welcome to the Business of Advice podcast.
I appreciate that. Thanks for having me.
Let's start where I like to start each of these. Is just having you give people a little bit of your background and journey. I know for the last year now, you've been doing some trainings here with Advisors Excel and our advisors, going out seeing some of them too. But just talk about mainly your time with Sandler, and then maybe a little explanation. I think a lot of people probably know who Sandler Sales Training is, but for those who don't, maybe give a little background there too.
Yeah, for sure. So originally from Baltimore, moved to Cleveland, Ohio in 2006, and it really wasn't until I moved to Cleveland that I found Sandler. I've always been a professional salesperson, and I was working for actually a recruiting firm, recruiting fiscal executives. And that recruiting firm actually hired a Sandler trainer to train us. And the funny part about the whole story is Sandler is corporate, or their headquarters are actually in Baltimore.
Oh.
My corporate office when I was working in Baltimore was 2 buildings down, but it took me really moving to Ohio to find them. And, for the listeners that don't know Sandler's a global organization, roughly about 200 training locations across the globe. And we typically partner with organizations that are looking to put more structure and accountability around the sales process.
And I would say, I'll say maybe the premier sales training organization, in the country. So just a stellar reputation, organization we've used a lot through the years. Even when we started the company, had a bunch of Sandler training we would take our team through that was doing recruiting also. So let's jump in, because I want a lot of this focus is obviously going to be around sales. It's such a huge component of business. I said it kind of in the intro, but I say all the time, if you can get in front of prospective clients and then convert them into clients, so if you can market and sell, you're going to be pretty successful in business. But when you think about sales, and maybe more specifically, think about some of the groups that you've been brought in to work with. What are the things that people get right about sales, and then what are some of the things that you see people doing wrong most often when it comes to sales?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Cody. So I think a lot of times organizations do a really good job of training more from a product knowledge perspective and really getting people to understand the products and services that they offer, the ins and outs of those.
Yep.
And I think where organizations fall down a bit is how to actually position the product knowledge in a way more to really create a questioning strategy, if that makes sense. To really get down and figure out what some of the emotional buying reasons are, because as a core philosophy, one of the core philosophies that Sandler has is people buy emotionally, right? But they justify intellectually. And if we can just teach our people to understand what the emotional buying reasons are of our prospects, it just makes for a more compelling conversation.
One of the, I think the benchmarks of Sandler, I think one of the things that I learned really early on with that was just the ability to ask really good questions, right? And I think a lot of times what I would see is people tend to talk too much in the sales process, right? If you're the person in the sales role, you tend to talk, as you said, a lot about your product versus really asking questions. Can you maybe just walk through like some of the foundational, I know this wasn't a question I was going to ask you, but just some of the foundational questions that Sandler teaches people to use to evoke that emotion and get people really thinking about the decision they're going to make?
Yeah, I think that it is a fundamental staple of Sandler. Like it is a pillar, right? We call it the fuel that's really going to drive, the Sandler process. And when we think about the way that we're positioning questions, so one, open-ended, right? But that's like sales 101.
Yep.
So if we want to kind of take it to sales 102, we need to ask interrogative-led questions. So the who, what, where, when, why, and hows of the world, right? When we can start to articulate questions in that manner, that's where I can get to this 60-40, 70-30 split where the way I'm framing my questions, the prospect really has to go into a little bit more detail, right? Versus maybe like a verb-like question, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Think about maybe one of your favorite clients you've worked with. It may be to make it even a little more specific. I know you've just been in a few of our advisors' offices. Could you give a little snapshot of maybe what it looked like pre-Sandler before you showed up and then what it looks like today? Just some of the things that you were able to go in and tweak or improve in those offices?
Yeah, for sure. So one that kind of sticks out in my mind is it was actually a financial planner who already had a really good book of business and was doing a lot of the right things, but it was simple little tweaks. And one of those tweaks is managing the expectations of the process really upfront. And if I'm going to Sandlerize that, we're going to talk about the upfront contract, right?
Yep.
And really kind of laying out the steps of our process. But the most important part of the upfront contract is the desired outcome, right? Ultimately, when we talk about the definition of a salesperson, like Cody, if you had to define the word salesperson, right, and that was your job to define that term, it's Wikipedia, how would you define it?
I would say someone who makes a living by convincing people to buy the product that they offer.
Right, and I love it, and that's typically the answer that I receive.
Yep.
And I have a very simplistic definition, right? My job is to help you make a decision, right? So like when we look at it from that lens or that context, I just need to go out and facilitate conversations, right?
One of the speak to that, maybe the power of the upfront contract, if you would. Yep. I just one of the things I think I've seen with that, and just in general with some of the things that you all have helped us and our advisors really understand, is that if the client is constantly in the state of worrying, like, okay, here comes the pitch, here comes the, they're if that's always in the back of their mind, versus I think one of the things we've seen with an upfront contract is it releases some of that pressure. Like you're being very clear of what's going to happen and at what point you're going to need to make a decision. But like I don't know. I guess I've just seen it removes a lot of the pressure. So would you talk about maybe the psychology behind the upfront contract, the benefits of it? Maybe even go into a little bit of what that is like or what that would look like as an advisor would use it.
Yeah, 100%. So the way I like to kind of frame this up, if you've ever most people aren't super excited to go to the dentist, right? It's just one of those experiences that, people just have a little anxiety over, whether it's the needle or the drill. But if you've ever watched a pediatric dentist, right, with kids, when they go in, right, they sit them in the chair and they let them kind of move the chair up and down and they let them hold the drill. Why are they doing that, right? They're really just trying to get them comfortable, right, with what's going to, be in the foreseeable future as they're sitting in that chair.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of an extreme example, right? But there's a ton of anxiety with prospects when they're going into sales interactions with salespeople. So how we get to kind of relieve some of that pressure, and one of the things I love about Sandler is we like to lead with no, right? No is a perfectly viable option. We're not going to be a fit for everybody. And when we take that stance and kind of build that into our upfront agreement, you can actually you can see people just start to relax, right? Because there is a lot of pressure. Like how's Cody going to sell to me, right? When am I going to get sold to? And we just have this buildup, and the upfront contract releases all of it.
It's I always tell advisors, that that couple, let's say it's a couple, is probably sitting in their car before they walk in for that first appointment saying, no matter what happens today, we're not agreeing to anything, right?
That's right.
And that's where I think, most of our advisors aren't asking someone to make a decision till, maybe 2-3 appointments down the way. It's usually not on that first appointment anyway. So that upfront contract just changes the whole, I think, narrative in their mind a little and releases that pressure. And just if people aren't using that in their sales process, like it's just one of those foundational things that just changes it dramatically. So flip it here. I always say this. I think being a financial advisor is one of the most noble professions. I think it's also a very intimate profession, right? You know more about your client than outside maybe their doctor or maybe I say a priest or someone, like more about them than almost anyone. Talking about a topic, money, that for a lot of them is a tough topic to talk about. So I'll ask it this way: is there something in the sales process when you're an advisor, and every advisor's in sales, right? I think sometimes that gets a negative connotation, but like generally speaking, people won't make a change, unless someone convinces them that it's better for them. And I would sure hope most of the advisors that listen to this understand they're usually putting the client in a better position. So is there a different way to approach sales and maybe the sales process as a financial advisor versus maybe something else? And I hate to say like, selling a car or something like that, but just knowing that it's such an intimate thing, but also like such an important thing. Any different approach that advisors should be taking?
Well, and it truly is a consultative sale, right? When we see the complexity of, as a consumer, making the decision, right, to move assets or to change a strategy, right, that they've historically been in, that's a big deal, right? That's a big deal for people to kind of wrap their head around. So as we're kind of navigating this, like when we think about purchasing a house or purchasing a car, not that that's not a big decision, right? It's a big investment, but this is somebody's livelihood. This is people have worked their entire lives for this particular moment, right? They can drive off into the sunset and feel comfortable, right, with the nest egg they have in place.
Yep.
So the anxiety that people have around this decision is real, and how we kind of navigate that. And we're going to do that through tactics and strategies like upfront contracts and, questioning strategies like reversing, right, and pendulum theory. Now, I'm using some buzzwords, so hopefully I'm not going to confuse some people, but these are all kind of cornerstones in the fuel of the questioning strategies that really drive the Sandler process.
Go, if you don't mind, maybe talk
Sure.
through a few of those, like maybe a few of the favorite strategies. So reversing, pendulum theory. Trying to think of what else. You were just in here a few weeks ago. Now that we're recording, but maybe hit just on that was going to be my follow-up question. Is like, what are a few of your favorite strategies? And then I'll ask you a question about pacing the sales process also.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about reversing first. Sometimes we get asked questions early on in the sales process, like, tell me a little bit about your investment strategy, like your philosophy of your firm. When a prospect asks us that, a lot of times it's way early. We don't even know enough to be able to answer the question, right? Now, so there's one or two ways we can kind of handle this. One, we can answer the question, which sometimes isn't in our best interest.
Yep.
Or I could do something like reverse. And when we were first teaching clients, kind of this tactic and technique, it takes a little muscle memory to get comfortable with. But the first thing we're going to want to do is put a softening statement in there. So Cody, if you're my prospect and you say, hey, tell me a little bit about your investment strategy of your firm, And I say, hey, that's a logical question, Cody. I can appreciate that. And, a lot of prospective clients ask us that question early in the process. And unfortunately, I just don't know enough about you quite yet to be able to answer that. If it's okay, can I ask you a handful of questions and we can get there together? Would that make sense?
It's great.
Now, outside of role play for a second, Cody, did that feel evasive?
Nope.
Right? And that's really what I'm after. And with this tactic and technique, we have to be very mindful. So Cody, I shared with you earlier, I'm an East Coast guy that's living in the Midwest. When I first moved here, it was tough. I was fast talking. I was abrasive. People looked at me funny. And it wasn't until I actually recorded myself that I really understood that my pace was not at the right tone, the right pace for kind of where I was living and who I was selling to. And I had to kind of retrain my brain a little bit to just take a step back and slow down. Because what we often say at Sandler, it's not what we say, it's how we say it.
So I was going to ask you about pace, and not even so much like tone of voice, although that, or, speed, I think that's a good one, but just in a sales process, and I know this can be different depending upon what you're selling, right? But do you have any just like benchmark or way that you would approach, like, here's when you should ask for the client to make a decision, and like how not to, I think if you do that too quick, without really uncovering everything, your likelihood of no maybe goes up, but also I think your likelihood of being able to do the best job for the client and truly understand everything. So just any wisdom or advice around that.
Yeah. So when we take a 30,000 foot view of Sandler, and if I had to really just encapsulate it into like a term or a phrase, Sandler is heavy on the qualify, very soft on the close. And really kind of what the essence of that, the way that David Sandler built the selling system was bonding and rapport up front, right? But that's going to happen kind of throughout the sales process, right? You manage the expectations through the upfront contract. So if you're in a kind of a 3-stage sales process, whether it's a seminar, right, and then we're going to have a fact finder, and then we're going to have a closing appointment. If that's your process, awesome. Right, we're gonna really talk about that upfront contract in that initial meeting to kind of walk them through that process. Does that make sense?
It does. Yep.
So I think collectively, Sandler gives the business development professional a lot of control, but also allows us to understand that we have rights in the sales process, right? And we have just as much right to do an about face, because not every prospect is going to become a client.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's an important part, and nor should they, right? Like,
exactly right.
I think if you ask any advisor the biggest mistake they've made, it's like, we knew we probably shouldn't have brought that person on, but we did, and then we regretted it. So I think that's a great position to be in, too, of understanding. Like, you don't need every person to become a client. You want to be selective in who you bring on to your firm, also, or any business, really, right? You don't want bad clients. So
exactly right.
You mentioned something there. I was going to ask you. Our advisors do a lot of marketing. It can be direct mail, digital marketing, referrals to drive people into some sort of a live event. It can be an educational event, dinner, seminar, something like that. Any strategies, like, and this is maybe more from the sales side of it, that you've seen to market those events that can increase the attendance of the people showing up there?
Yeah. So, every firm's going to be a little bit different in how they position the kind of marketing pieces. Now, here's the one thing I know about marketing, right? I'm more of an expert in sales and communication, but sales and marketing are married. Fair?
Yep.
Sometimes, though, the relationship's a little dysfunctional, right? And here's kind of what I mean by that, right? Sales doesn't necessarily understand the marketing side of it and what they do, and then marketing doesn't necessarily understand what the salespeople go through. And so I get a lot of this, right? Like a lot of finger pointing. And if I can just figure out how to unify the two and bring them together, right? And so we can do some of that through our messaging. And I think when we're positioning, whether it's an event or we're going to do a seminar, we have a tendency to kind of lean on the features and benefits of that event. Well, the Sandler way is going to talk about, well, how do we plug in some emotion around that? So can we throw out some pain indicators in our marketing pieces, right, that people might be able to kind of latch on to? Does that make sense?
It does. I think one of the things too in sales and marketing sometimes is there's this inherent marketing just wants as many people to show up. Sales wants qualified people to show up, right? So figuring out how to get the right mix in there too. So any thoughts around some language that helps you pull the right person in? I know that's a little tougher question.
Yeah, that's a really tough question. And I think some, like when we think about the language, I go back to our communication wheel. And I think if we can get creative in maybe some of the ways that we're positioning some of those invites, and what I mean by communication wheel, so 55% of all of our communication is done through our physiology, right? 38%'s the actual tonality, right, of the sound of what we're trying to articulate, and then 7% are the actual words that we use. So depending on the type of invite that we're sending, right, I think we can impact the message that we're sending. If it's just a paper invite, right, I got a 7% shot I hit that person, right, with the right words. But if there's something that I can do from a video or maybe a little bit of a creative invite, then I can start to control some of that messaging a little bit more.
That's good. Maybe a transition there a little. I'm making a little bit of a jump, but when we talk about technology, I think today it's hard to have a discussion around anything without talking about artificial intelligence. And I think in sales, we're starting to see more and more tools being built and developed to use in the sales process. Any thoughts you have on AI and how we can use and leverage it more in sales?
So I love it, right? I love artificial intelligence. I love technology, right? It's making our life a lot easier, but it's also going to do something else, right, as we're kind of progressing, and it's happening so fast. And I think there's these moments in time throughout history, like when the internet hit, and I think there was a lot of people kind of up in arms, like salespeople are done, right? It's over, right? Yep. Everybody's going to buy online. Well, here we are in 2024. There's plenty of business development professionals running around. And I think AI is very similar, right? It's going to elevate our game. We're all probably using it in one way, shape, or form, whether or not we realize it or not, right? It's built into our Microsoft, our Outlook, right? Viva. It schedules focus time for me, right? Yep. So I can kind of block my calendar out. And in my world, my focus time is my prospecting time, right? Because everybody's got this little magic link, right? They can schedule time with me. So even when I'm trying to protect my calendar, right, sometimes it doesn't get protected, but with AI, it does. Now let's view AI from a sales leadership, right, or a principle of the firm. How can we leverage AI to make ourselves better leaders? So Gong, right? Gong's a really cool platform. And, they basically did an analysis. I think it was like 28,000 closed deals. And one of the variables, I think it was 17% was the report I read, that said people that talked about the defined outcome of the sales call, their sales cycle was dramatically decreased when they talked about that in the initial meeting. I mean, think about that for a second. I feel very passionately, 18 years of doing this, upfront contracts is the most important thing we teach.
Yep.
Right? Because if we're not good at executing that step, we're behind the eight ball from the start.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We have some advisors that use Gong, right? That all their advisors are using, and to see some of the insights it can give you, language, words that are using. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch. There's no doubt. I'll use that as a transition point because you kind of brought this up. As our advisors grow and scale, I think, most common thing we see is someone comes to us, a lot of times they're the only advisor. As they start to grow the business, then they have to hire in additional advisors. So I'd love to spend a little time talking about people, sales management, sales leadership, but I'll start with this one. Have you seen any characteristics or traits that you think makes for a good, I'll say salesperson, right? But they're going to be in this advisor role, but someone that's going to be good at sales? Are there some common things you've seen that like the best have?
So the first one, and absolutely. So I think the first one that really hits home when you ask that question, ambition and drive. Ambition and drive is hard to kind of coach and develop, right? You either have it or you don't. And, and so plug in whatever term you want, grit, right? But, but ambition and drive is something that's in us. And so then the deeper question becomes, how do you interview for that? And what are the types of questions that you ask to kind of draw that ambition and drive out? And I feel pretty passionately, especially with financial planners and advisors, we got to bet on ourselves, right? We know that we can go out and we can drive impact and we can really help people. We're passionate about what we're doing. And I think when we're out having conversations, with prospective candidates, there's got to be a little bit of a pedigree there, right? So what is the history of that person, right? So we like former athletes. When we think about former athletes, right, they're competitive in nature, right? They don't like to lose. And if I've got somebody that's got a track record, right, of an athletic background, right, love that. The other variable I'm going to look for is a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. When we think about coaching and developing, the marketplace is ever evolving and ever changing, and we have to be constant learners, right? We have to have a growth-minded mindset if we're really going to be successful, because the business today is not going to be the business tomorrow.
I want to ask a follow-up question because this is a big one I get around hiring. One, let me back up. I love that. I'll say one of the things I see a lot that is really successful is advisors getting someone still in college, maybe interning for a few years to get to know the firm, but really that student athlete, right? Trying to find that person who has played athletics, like you said, I think has that natural drive to some degree there to really help that, but can really grow and develop them. That's leading into my second question. This is a question I think we get a lot, and I've seen both work, so I'm curious to hear kind of your thoughts, and that's when advisors are hiring, sometimes we have advisors who are looking for an established advisor who already has lots of experience. I would say more often than not, I see more success, though, when they hire, train, and develop someone who has some of those inherent things. But like just any wisdom you have around like which would you go for? Someone who's got the experience or maybe someone new that you can grow and develop and train in your sales process that you don't have to maybe retrain some things. And then depending upon each of those, are there any just words of advice around what to do based on which one of those you hire?
Yeah, so I'm gonna take a big step back when I'm kind of fielding this question, because it's gonna depend. If I have a firm maybe that's a little bit smaller, and maybe the principal or the person that's going to really be kind of overseeing the onboarding of this person doesn't have a tremendous amount of time to really kind of assist in that onboarding, right? Then I think as I'm kind of talking through this, right, the decision's probably pretty apparent, right? I'm probably going to want somebody with more experience. But if I have the infrastructure and the middle management and the support that I can really home grow somebody, right, then I love that strategy, right? Because I can really mold that person into what I want. Now, the other thing we got to talk about with that is culture, right? Because so let's say I do have the infrastructure, but I do come across that candidate, right, that has a book of business, has history in the business. What am I going to do to the culture, right, if I put that one person on an island and say, hey, Johnny B. Closer can do whatever he wants, right? But the rest of you need to do it this way. I think we need to be careful of what kind of messaging we're sending to the rest of the team.
That was, Rob, I'm going to repeat what you said because I think there's some incredible wisdom there that I'm not sure I've heard said a lot. So anyone who listens to this, if you don't have the infrastructure to train them well, I'm going to kind of repeat what you said, but paraphrase it a little.
Sure.
You probably want to hire someone with more experience that can hit the ground running, right? That you can share a little bit of time with. But if you have that infrastructure, being able to home grow, train, develop someone probably makes a little bit more sense. Obviously exceptions to both sides of that, but I think especially that first one, because I would say a lot of advisors probably are in that space where they're the primary revenue driver for the firm, at least when they start here at AE, a lot of times they are. We try and grow them out of that to where it's not all dependent upon them, but you're not going to have all this time in your calendar to go spend, develop, nurture someone who has no experience at all. So I think that's a great just thought process for anyone as they go through that hiring. When you start to hire advisors and now you've got a team underneath of you, can you talk about the biggest maybe challenge that people have moving from being the lead salesperson to now, what we say all the time is you have to understand as you build a team out of other advisors that you're now leading a sales organization. You're not just the salesperson, you're leading a sales organization. So what are some of the challenges or mistakes that people make? I'll say advisors, but just anyone who's making that transition from I sell all day to now I'm leading a team of salespeople.
Yeah. So I think the first one, and why the heart is in the right place, right? But it's rescuing, right? So let's just pretend for a minute that like we're shadowing, our newly hired salesperson, and we're gonna go on a call with them, where we actually are in the meeting and we can kind of see it's not going kind of the way it should, and as a leader, I got two choices, right? I can let them crash and burn and maybe learn a lesson, or I can jump in and rescue. And I think for the latter part, most leaders, they'll have a tendency to jump in and kind of rescue the salesperson. But ultimately, we don't let them learn and develop from their mistakes, right? We all need that. We all need to kind of fall on our face every once in a while, right? And be able to kind of take those lessons and self-reflect on them and adapt our strategy so we don't let that happen again.
One of the biggest perspectives I try and give advisors as they start to hire other advisors in underneath of them is they're never going to be quite as good as you are, at least early on, right? And I think a lot of times advisors get very frustrated very quickly. They're like, well, I would have converted that, or, my numbers were a lot better than that. And what I try and share with them all the time is you can just never discount the reps, right? I think it's so important that you've got to put the reps in to just get the experience in anything in life, right? But sales as much as anything, if not maybe more than most. Do you have any thoughts on how to speed up those reps maybe for new advisors that you bring on? Are there any things that you can be doing as the leader of that organization? And it may not be like real life reps necessarily, but just any thoughts on like how you can speed up some of that to where they do get better because they're getting some more reps in it. So maybe another way, great way to train advisors as you bring them on.
Well, and I think it's a great question, right? And there's kind of a key word that I think a lot of people, when I'm going to say it, might cringe a little bit, right? But it's, can we create an environment where we can role play?
Yeah.
Right? Where we can actually put people into like a real life situation, real life conversation, and get them to swing the bat, right? Deliver an upfront contract, right? Try a different questioning strategy. And so I think this other thing when we're talking about technique, like if you've ever had a golf lesson, right, it's kind of a painful experience, right? Because there's so many variables to a golf swing, how you hold the club, your stance, right, your follow through, what you're doing with your hips. Sandler can feel a little bit like the golf swing at times, right? Because there's a lot of technique in there. There's a lot of psychology in what we teach. And I think when people first get engaged with us, it's like, oh my gosh, like, what do I work on? Okay, well, we're just going to pick one thing, right? We're going to geek out on the upfront contract, right? We're going to do that for a certain amount of time till you feel like you really own that technique. Then we're going to move on to questioning strategies, right? Then we're going to work on decision-making process, right? And being able to kind of chunk it down to where people can then start to really apply the concepts.
I had someone on the podcast just a few episodes before you, Alan Stein Jr., and one of the things he talked about, we were talking this idea of reps, and he has a background in basketball, and he said, the great, and you just said something that made me think of this. He said, the great players, they'll practice one shot 500 times till they just know like they're going to hit that shot, where he's like, the average players will shoot 500 shots from all over the place, where the great ones will do one. And I think even on sales, to your point, what triggered that was like practicing the upfront contract 500 times to where you perfect that before you move on is going to make you so much better. And then once you've got that down, right, then it's like, okay, now let's move on to the next shot that I want to learn how to take really, really well and practice that over and over and over again. So I love that idea of like, how do you master one of those things really well? Move on to the next one, master it, and just that role playing some of those things, like is it the exact same as sitting in front of a client? No, but it sure, practice makes perfect, right? It's not same thing shooting, 500 shots in an empty gym as a game, but you're probably going to shoot better in the game if you've shot those 500 shots too.
Well, 100%. And it's simple things, Cody, like on your drive to work, like just shut the podcast off for a second or shut the radio off, whatever you're doing, right? And practice your upfront contract, right? On your 10, 15, 20-minute commute, like whatever it is, right? But swing the bat, right? And record yourself on the iPhone, right? We all have recording devices on us at all times, right? Play it back. What does it sound like, right? Intentional pauses, right? The pace of our upfront contract, all of those things. These are silly little nuances, and we need to be relentless, right, in our pursuit of really mastering our craft.
That's good. I like that. Some people, I think, take it a little too much for granted. So that putting the reps in to get really good at it. I'm going to share something about our business. You talked about this earlier, and I want to ask you to maybe share some thoughts or advice on this. So I've shared this with a lot of our advisors. When we first started the company, we would hire, we call it, I think everybody here kind of has a VP title. I don't know, but we would call them like VP, and their main job was to recruit advisors and then the core relationship management team. Like I know you've worked a lot with Jake, some of our team here. Like that's what we hired them to do. And early on, we were so busy doing things like we just kind of let them do what they want, right? And I say all the time, like early on, our process was probably 20% standard, 80% variable based on each VP in that team. Over time, as we've matured as an organization, put more systems, structure, training, processes in place, that's probably flipped to where now it's probably more 80% kind of a standard process that we expect them to follow. And then they still have some flexibility, on that 20%. You mentioned earlier, you may hire someone into your firm that is established, and you maybe give them the flexibility to do something a little different. How does that impact culture? Generally speaking, though, as you start building and scaling a sales organization, how much of that do you feel like has to be like, this is our approach, this has to be repeated, versus how much you give, that advisor some flexibility or freedom in how they approach things?
Well, okay. That's an awesome question. And I'm going to geek out on it a little bit because I think a lot of people are surprised when I say, like, I don't believe in scripts. And I think when sales leaders hear me say that, they go, what do you mean? Like, they have to say this certain thing. And I'm like, well, here's the thing. When people hear me and I walk into a room and I say, hey, tell me a little bit about your business. And then I can rip off, a 30-second commercial or a 30-second snapshot. And they're like, holy, like, how do you do that? Well, it's because I'm technique based. Right. And when I can and how I can articulate that in a way is because I rely on my technique. I don't rely on the script, because a lot of people, will say to me or my business partner, Rick, they'll say, hey, just give me the language. I just need the language. And here's the thing. I'm not going to be authentic. It's not going to come off as authentic if I'm reading a script. So like while the process and the steps, right, are sound and solid,
Yep.
I don't want to mess with that, but I want people to use their own words. Is
That's
that
it is. I think, and maybe I'll paraphrase that. If like you need to understand the concept and the technique more than the words. Is
exactly?
maybe the way I would say that. Right? Is understand why you're doing it. Don't just read the script. Right? We've had
Exactly.
some people over here, through the years where you would hear them out there, like literally, like he would walk around reading the script. I'm like, oh man, you're missing it. Like
Yeah,
that's not what we're trying to do here. So. No, that's good. Okay, I want to ask you one kind of final question about leading a sales team, and then we'll jump into these lightning round questions here at the end. But
sure.
how important are KPIs, benchmarking, when you're leading a sales organization, and then how would you use those effectively in like holding your advisors or your salespeople accountable, pushing them, motivating them, all those good things?
Yeah, I love it. So I'm a big key performance indicator guy. I love metrics, and it's not everybody feels like accountability is a dirty word, right? On the receiving end of it, right? If I'm holding you accountable, like it's not comfortable for me. But when we think about the key performance indicators, I think there's a couple things that organizations make mistakes with key performance indicators, especially around sales. So Cody, if I have a first year rep, is that first year reps KPI is going to be the same as like somebody that's been at it for 10 years?
You would hope not, unless that 10-year veteran's not very good.
Right. So like I think when we try and blanket key performance indicators across a team, it doesn't work well. Right. Because we believe in a cookbook mentality here at Sandler. So like I want to create a recipe to the individual. Right. I'm a relationship guy. Right. So a lot of my business, 18 years of doing this, kind of comes to me, right? My network's kind of feeding me, versus my associate, right, who's a year into the business. He's got to do a ton of behavior, right? He's doing a ton of outbound calls. He's having a ton of conversations, right? And I think now if we look at it from the advisor level, what are the metrics there for? And I think a lot of people on the receiving end of it, it's like people are micromanaging me. Like I don't like this. Well, that's not the intent. I actually don't care what people's numbers are. Here's what I care about. How much behavior do you have to go execute to get the defined outcome you're looking for? If it's 10 phone calls to have 4 conversations to get you 2 appointments to get you 1 close, awesome, right? Because now there's something we can work with.
Yep.
Right? Now we can start to really manage our behavior and be disciplined around our behavior. We have to understand our metrics.
Is there on the metrics any couple key ones you do really like that you think like, hey, these are the things you got to pay attention to when you're leading a sales organization?
So I think when I look at what I look for, so what is the proactive behavior, right? That's within my control.
Yep.
Right. So the amount of times I'm actually picking up the phone or I'm meeting people, I'm having conversations. So that's kind of number one. Now, from there, the amount of dials to the amount of conversations I'm having. Right. So like statistically, like I don't think a ton of your people, right, are doing a bunch of cold calls. Right. But
Sure.
if there's that cold calling environment, right, that's going to be dramatically shifted down. 10 to 20% hit ratio is typically what we see. Right. So for every 10 people we call, we're going to talk to 1 or 2 people. And then from there, those conversations, right, to the appointments to presentations to closes. I track no's. Some people think that's weird, right? But when you believe in leading with no, right, it's a good metric to track. Now, we also track referrals. We're a big believer in introductions and really leveraging our network.
Yep.
Now, I measure incoming and outgoing. And, some people ask me, why do you track the outgoing? I believe in Emerson's law of compensation, right? In order to get more, I need to give more. Right? So those are kind of our KPIs.
That's good. I think the importance of them, I think it was Warren Buffett said something along the lines, I'll probably mess it up a little, but he's like, it's pretty much impossible to know if you're winning or losing if you don't have a scoreboard, right? And I think that's the thing that advisors sometimes even don't want to build it because they feel like they're micromanaging, but like you don't have a way when you're leading a sales organization to tell if your people are winning or losing if you don't have that scoreboard in place. So just the importance of that is critical.
Well, and if like as a leader, I encourage my leaders, the metrics will tell you something too, right? If I got somebody doing a ton of behavior and they're actually getting people on the phone, but they're not converting appointments, I got a telephone issue, right? Maybe they need some soft skills, around articulating themselves right over the phone versus, and maybe on the flip side, when they're in front of people, they do really well, right? They can execute, right? So it can, from a coaching perspective, the numbers can tell me a lot about where I need to spend my focus with that individual.
That's good. Okay, I want to jump into these lightning round questions. These can be kind of short, quick answers here at the end that just whatever comes to mind. So first one is there I'll say a new lesson since COVID that you've learned that you feel that you're going to carry forward for the rest of your career or life?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, and I think as we kind of hit the rocky road of like, the COVID era, right, when we were all kind of shut in and, we all had to fundamentally change our business overnight. And I actually I gotta thank my wife for this one, but she looked at me and I have a chalkboard in my office. And one day I walked in and said, "Enjoy the journey." And that one just resonates with me, right? Because regardless of things are going really well or things are going really bad, it will end, right?
Yep. That's good. I think that's a good perspective that a lot of people have taken away from it, and I try and say that about business too. Like there's going to be good times and there's always going to be bad times, right? So like don't just know they're going to come and got to get through them and make to the other side. So, okay, second question, what is the one thing that you did that graduated you from being good, I'll say a good salesperson to a great salesperson?
Oh, good salesperson to a great salesperson. So knee-jerk reaction to that question is creating a systematic way that I can operate with defined outcomes that I can control and manage, that's repeatable, transferable, and I can coach and develop not only myself, but my people.
So, and I know I said lightning round, but maybe dig just a little deeper. What does that look like?
So before Sandler,
Yep.
I was actually a decent salesperson, right? And what that equated to, and I thought I was, right? And I didn't understand necessarily that there was this other way. But I was good with people.
Yep.
But if you sat down with me, say we were on this podcast and I wasn't a Sandler guy and I didn't have a process and a systematic way to approach the market, and you said, "Hey, Rob, how do you sell?" I'd go, "I don't know, Cody. I go out and I'm just good with people."
Yeah.
Right. I was what we called unconsciously competent. Right. I would go out and have good conversations, compelling, but there was no system or process to it. And I think what Sandler does, and what has really elevated my game from being good to being elite, is I'm consciously competent. I know exactly what I'm doing.
That's good. I think that's the good to great, and you could apply that to a lot of things to make that shift. Okay, right. Third question. Is there something that you are doing this year for your own personal growth and development that you're excited about?
Yeah. So I think anytime we're growing our organizations, right, with growth comes complexity. And I think what I'm really excited about is empowering my team and the people around me, right, to pool some of those things that I've really managed over the years, so I can truly scale and kind of get to the next level. And I think for a lot of us, right, that are organizational leaders, right, we have a tendency to really white knuckle some of that stuff. And I'm excited to watch my people grow and pull some of that off my plate, right, to kind of elevate the entire organization.
That's the big shift for every business owner. So it's the toughest one, but when you do it well, it's amazing how freeing it can be. So, okay, fourth question. Let's say can't be one of the Sandler books, but is there a book you've recommended most to other entrepreneurs or business owners?
That's a good one. Where would this person be on their entrepreneurial journey?
Oh, well, I'll throw it this way. Let's say someone who's starting off and someone who's very mature in their journey. Would you, in case you recommend two different books?
All right, so kind of new in their entrepreneurial journey, I really enjoyed Gerber's book,
E-Myth. Yep.
Yeah.
Great one.
Because it opens your eyes to being the technician, right? And the fact that like we have to have systems and processes inside of our organization. And I read this my first year in Sandler, and what I kind of started to realize is so many organizations have all these cool systems and processes inside of their companies, but the last one they think about systematizing, it's sales.
Mm-hmm.
But like, let's think about that for a second. Cody, nothing happens inside of any company, it doesn't matter with the industry, until somebody does what?
Sell something.
Right? And then everybody else can get to work.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the part that's always fascinated me.
That's good. Okay, more mature business owner.
So more mature business owner, I think if we're looking at two things. So one, if they're trying to holistically, fundamentally change something about themselves. So maybe it's like a mindset shift. I really loved this book by Napoleon Hill. It's called Outwitting the Devil, where it really kind of talks and really starts to kind of think through the beliefs and the self-talk that we have. The other one, if it's more from a productivity lens, I absolutely love Atomic Habits, right? And really creating discipline in our environments to be conducive to the behavior we're looking to execute.
No, that's a great one. That book is a phenomenon too. We had James Clear speak here at AE years ago before the book actually came out, and then to watch that thing has just sat at the top of the bestseller list for years.
Yeah.
It's insane what has happened with that book. So, okay, final question. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Best piece of advice that I've ever received. So this is going to sound strange, but I think we are our own worst critic. And if we would just believe in ourselves, if we would just believe that we can get to the next level, that we can break through kind of that glass ceiling we all have to kind of get to that next level, and just give ourselves the opportunity to do that. Right. So to me, it's belief in ourselves.
Yeah, that doesn't sound strange at all. It actually sounds like the conversation I have with most business owners. So I think we all have that story going on in our head at times. So Rob, man, I appreciate the time. If you would let people know maybe a little bit more about Sandler, your organization, and how they can learn more about you, follow all the things that you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. So if you want to learn a little bit more about Sandler and, the Sandler philosophy, you can kind of hop on our website, www.mpsolutions.sandler.com for more information there. There's a ton of videos. If you're looking, there's also, if you go to sandler.com, we do have a LMS system, a learning management system. You can start to kind of poke around there. There's a ton of white papers, but ton of information regarding Sandler and our strategy approaching sales.
That's great. I appreciate everything you've done for our advisors. I know we've done a lot of trainings, and actually, if you're listening to this and you're an advisor with Advisors Excel, we have Rob coming into Topeka in August, October, and November. So if you and your sales team haven't signed up for that, talk to your VP and they'll get you in here. The feedback's been incredible from those. So Rob, again, I appreciate the time today.
Likewise, and I appreciate you having me on.